Hello and welcome to Beyond the Lot. I'm Kevin Timson, dealership attorney at Arent Fox Schiff, and I have a special guest here today with me on Beyond the Lot, Zach Kuzemka, Chief Executive Officer of National Business Brokers. NBB is one of the largest and longest standing advisory groups in automotive retail, and Zach came on board to NBB last year, having been Chief Operating Officer for Global Consumer and Retail Investment Banking at Raymond James. Very, very impressive there. Zach, it's great having you here on Beyond the Lot.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here and have the conversation today.
Well, first and foremost, it's obvious that you made it back from Las Vegas. I know that was a huge,
Barely, yeah.
like a lot of us. It's just amazing to me. I think the estimate that we had was that there were 24,000 attendees. I don't know if all of them were registered or not, but I know they, all the automotive dealers and all of their employees and partners and advisors and professionals, certainly dominated this trip and certainly kept the convention center, both sides of it, pretty full. So it was good talking with you there and on previous occasions. I think for everyone here listening on Beyond the Lot, tell me a little bit about yourself and tell me what led you to NBB and to the dealership world in general.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of a crazy story, but originally from upstate New York and started my career in investment banking with Wells Fargo, large firm. Ended up moving to another investment bank called Evercore, which predominantly focuses on a lot of larger type transactions. Kind of got sold on the grass is always greener situation and moving over to corporate development and M&A strategy and went to work for a big travel company called Expedia, where we were rolling up the online travel agency space. So did some deals there. We ended up doing a big deal called HomeAway, which was an Airbnb competitor, and spent a whole bunch of money for it. And then it kind of became quickly clear that M&A would be less of the priority and it was more integration and kind of optimizing Expedia as a whole. So once that happened, I ended up going to a small boutique for a period of time that ended up getting acquired by Citizens Financial. But just prior to that happening, actually got a call from a headhunter to join Raymond James. And as you mentioned, that's where I was previously for about the last 7 or 8 years. So my last role there was COO of the global consumer team. So offices across the U.S., also teams in London and Munich. So the year I joined that team, we did an acquisition and grew the team basically from 30 people in the consumer practice. And I believe when I left Raymond James, it was probably closer to about 90. So over a handful of years, nearly tripling the size of the team. So it was a huge growth ramp up and trying to figure out all the nuances and challenges and fun stuff that comes with that was awesome. But, funny enough, one of the areas that we started to, take a look at was auto services and auto retail and sort of say, there's a market here. There's a ton of M&A, but, there's not too many investment banks that are really spending time there. There's some brokerages and things like that, but, really trying to dig in and understand the space and some of the key players. So I spent about a year and a half trying to get up to speed in auto retail and understand, who are the players? Should we hire somebody? Should we look to acquire somebody? Like, what are our options to try and navigate and get into the space? Ultimately, at the end of the day, Raymond James, like a lot of other mid-market investment banks, private equity is just a huge part of their emphasis and their focus is really trying to focus on them as clients, which a lot of firms are doing. As you know, auto retail hasn't quite hit that same level of private equity interest. There's a lot of different forms of capital coming into the space and in a lot of family office and other alternative forms of capital, but not kind of true buyout private equity firm type money. So, we went pencils down and decided to go a different route. And sure enough, about 3 or 4 weeks later, I got a call from a headhunter who I hadn't heard from in probably, 12, 13 years with this opportunity to, interview for a position to be a C-level executive within NBB. So knew the firm a little bit, but got to know one of the founding partners, which is Brady Schmidt, um, and a partner that he had recently joined forces with, a guy by the name of Jacob Tilzer, who they separately own a holding company called Accrual Equity Partners, of which NBB is a portfolio company. And just hearing the story, hearing their vision about what they're trying to do, which is effectively, grow NBB, which has historically been just a broker type business in auto retail and one of the leaders in the space, but really grow it up into something special to make it a real, niche focused investment bank boutique. So that's kind of what the task was coming in. So got in the space and kind of got my feet underneath me, and we had tremendous support to grow, and that partnership with Accrual Equity Partners has been fantastic. And we've had a couple big names in the space join us from an advisory board level. JT Taylor, who helped lead the auto retail practice at Truist Securities. We had Jack Hollis join, who was the COO of Toyota North America and had been with Toyota for 33 years. And Tony Taylor, who a lot of people know in the industry, came over to us from Open Road Capital. So it was this kind of huge push for just finding really quality people who believed in a vision of, yes, deals are important in the transaction side of things, but everything we want to be doing is focused on the dealer themselves and understanding that, yes, deals are good and that is our business, but at the same time, really providing more of a strategic advisory service, knowing we may be in touch with the client or company for 2, 5, 10 years in advance of a transaction. And our job is to hopefully provide, guidance along the way and be value add. But also when the time comes, making sure that all their ducks in a row to make sure that they're optimizing for that transaction whenever it happens. So, no, that's a bit of a long-winded way of kind of saying how I got into this space, but that's kind of who we are, and hopefully a bit of how we're different.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I it certainly your story certainly resonates with me because I was effectively an outsider, right? Basically, if you haven't sold a car, if you haven't turned a wrench, in the auto business, you're deemed an outsider, right? So
Yeah.
I just remember, getting involved as a young attorney in the auto business and not knowing what the business was about, and
Yeah.
not, I always used to joke, I really need to get a better car. When I go to dealers, I
Yeah.
have to, preferably one that, is the same brand that they sell.
Yeah. There
And,
you go.
I certainly couldn't talk about, repairs because I can't change my own oil. And I still, well, I probably could, but it probably wouldn't be a good idea.
Yeah.
But, I think, you do reference the fact that, there is a little bit of an involvement on the private equity side, and certainly, that seemed to grow. You mentioned Open Road Capital, you mentioned, Accrual Equity Partners, and obviously, as the backup for this venture. Um, and it's interesting, definitely, that, there is some sustained interest here and there. And it's certainly an area, having talked with JT, as well as Tony about this, it's certainly an area that can tell a good story to private equity, not just, family offices and all
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
um,
And
yeah,
on the private equity piece, I mean, you talk about a lot of the key variables that, private equity gets excited about. And it's, for a large part of them, it is you find a platform, and that can be local, it can be regional, it can be national. And a lot of their bread and butter to create incremental value is the roll-up opportunity.
sure,
And when you start to see, and as you know, every brand in every region has slightly different variables of, what those valuations and multiples look like. But it has a lot of hallmarks of what private equity is interested in, and why you see people, starting to kind of perk their ears up a little bit more to understand the space. Because as you know, there's the roll-up opportunity. There's from a dealer age perspective, the average age is, continuing to creep up, and succession is becoming a lot more of a conversation, as I'm sure we'll talk about more in this discussion. But there's just a lot of key variables that make it in a potentially really attractive space to be. It's just there are some, hurdles that kind of sit in the way that uh, have been hurdles historically.
sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So, NADA is always a great opportunity. to meet folks within the industry face to face.
Yeah,
I don't know how much of a chance you got to meet, dealer principals and dealer operators and
right.
executives from different dealerships, but
Yeah.
to the extent that you have, what's really top of mind with those dealers right now, and what are some of the biggest takeaways that you have from meeting them?
Yeah, I think a lot of the dealers we talk to, um, there's a lot of pent up demand from a buyer's perspective of
Sure,
um, everybody's got their laundry list of here's the brands we're looking for, here's the regions or local areas we want to get a bit more exposure. I think you know, in large part, valuations are remaining, you know, quite attractive. There seems to have been a time period where there was a pretty big disconnect between sellers and buyers. And I think a lot of that has been right sized over the course of the last year or so. So I think there's an overall feel of it being a very conducive deal environment as we are in 26 now and as we go through the rest of the year. Um, the other piece that a lot of folks were talking about was, really just optimizing what you have. In a lot of instances, acquisitions can be, um, we'll call it a bit of a band-aid in terms of telling the growth story and sort of using that as the only growth lever for a business.
sure.
And I think, in talking and hearing about some of the conversations people are having out on the floor and seeing all the new technologies and seeing all the AI tools, there's going to be a lot of kind of inward looking to say, hey, are we really getting the most out of our businesses from an operational excellence standpoint? From are we integrating AI the right way? Are we really doing everything we can from a customer service and customer experience perspective? I think there's just going to be a lot of emphasis on that to continue just to get the operations right, because that's ultimately what you need. What you can acquire a business, but it's really the acquiring is the easy part, and it's going out and running a profitable business that's the more challenging day to day task to do. So I think in large part that's a lot of what we heard, but all in all, I would say very positive. And I think a lot of people are just generally excited for 26. There are still some. I mean, a lot of the same subjects probably from last year into this year is just overall vehicle pricing and affordability.
Sure.
No one has quite figured that out yet, or to what extent it's possible to start to get in the range of, what most people would view as affordable. So it's a lot of those same themes that we've seen from last year into this year. But like I said, the deal environment is strong. Overall, dealers are performing really well, not only from a growth perspective, but also from a margin perspective, and in terms of how sustainable the businesses are. So I think overall, it's a really exciting time.
Yeah, I definitely heard an emphasis on trying to, not only look at acquisitions, like you said, but also look for sources to maximize profit,
Yeah,
to grow organically in terms of revenue.
yeah,
How are we in terms of our BDCs? How are we in terms of, incentivizing the sales team and
yeah,
getting the right salespeople, in front of the customers? How are we enhancing our facilities, our showrooms, our service bays, the service drive, really? I mean, not even the
yeah,
service bays. It's really about the service drive and
yeah,
enhancing that facility as an entry into the dealership, providing for providing for a means to not only entice new customers into that specific dealership, but to retain the ones that they have, right? and
yeah,
and so and then when you look at dealers who have 5, 10, 15 dealerships, really, from what you're saying, how that roll up happens in real time, right?
yeah,
Are you do you have enough back office to really leverage that complete network of rooftops, or do you have too much, right? And so that's really the decision. That's probably where folks like yourself and the advisory group that you've assembled can certainly come in handy.
yeah. No, that's exactly right. The phrase that I think JT Taylor uses is "go or grow," and it is sort of the mindset of just staying static and not making a move one way or the other, or at least proactively starting to plan out what the broader strategy is, it's challenging to compete with the amount of technology innovation and everything else going on, and all the back office support that you get leverage out of as you continue to grow. But there's dealers that have 5 rooftops now, where depending on where they are from a career goal perspective, that they may say now's the time to either sell or think about succession planning. Or if you're at 5 and you've got grander ambitions, those are a lot of the people that are scooping up more of the, call it, single rooftops, of which that's a large portion of the market. But those are the ones that are going to grow from 5 to 10 to 13 to 15 over the course of the next handful of years. So it's really trying to identify what is someone's goals, and for us as an advisory firm is trying to figure out where we can add value in conversations or introductions or anything like that.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. I know, going back to your comment in terms of getting a little more traction in having a nice connection between buyers and sellers, right? I mean, I agree with you that there is, 2026 definitely is a better environment in terms
Yeah,
of, meeting buyer and seller expectations, right? And
yeah,
and certainly, the salad days, I've said this before, the salad days of COVID and making those incredible earnings is no longer here. But it's
yeah,
still good,
yeah.
right? But I still feel as if, and maybe this is just me, I still feel as if there are more buyers than sellers. Am I wrong on that? Am I missing something?
No, I would echo that as well. There's an extremely active universe of buyers that are looking to grow, and it's not even just the platforms that already have established um, rooftops. It's also a lot of folks that are just trying to go out on their own. So the capital is not necessarily the issue in this market, but there is generally a supply demand imbalance, which for buyers, is sometimes a challenging environment, because you're going to have competitive processes where a seller's probably talking to multiple people that are probably all well capitalized, that probably have some sort of angle or relationship. So, from a buyer's perspective, um, it is a little bit more challenging to get creative and figure out how you can structure deals, and sometimes be the first person to, I don't want to say overpay, but pay a premium just based on the competitive nature of the environment we're in. But on the flip side, the sell side, which is where we spend most of our time, it's a pretty conducive and attractive environment. If you've got, an asset that's that has the right brand and has the right regional presence, and good growth, good profitability, and running a good a good operation, you've got no shortage of people that are interested in those assets. And when you've got multiple people at the table, as um, you start to have a little bit more negotiation leverage, and starting to be able to pull on some of the key variables that folks are worried about, which is valuation, which is structure, which is really how quickly can you close a deal, in terms of deal
Sure.
certainty. I mean, certainty is a big thing, because there's a lot of people that have the capital, but are they able to get through the entire process and get approval on everything they need to get approval for? Those are some of the key things that we're constantly trying to weigh, of all those variables and figuring out who the best party is. But like I said earlier, capital is not always the issue. It's more of those other um, nuances that we're trying to weigh.
Sure. I think you make a good point when it comes to how approvable you are to the given manufacturer. Are
Yeah.
you finding challenges within certain manufacturers versus others, or do you feel like the challenges are fairly constant?
I would say we found that some are sometimes easier to get along through that process than others. And we'll leave it at that. But we wish everyone would get on board and make the process as quick and easy as possible. But everybody has a different flavor of what they're trying to accomplish, and their variation of things. So, and that's part of business. But um, OEM friendly um, folks, they just make the deals go a lot easier. And at
Sure.
the end of the day, everybody wants certainty in these processes. These are extremely important life events that are sometimes creating generational wealth. And as part of the OEMs and really being true partners to their dealers, it's always nice for people in our shoes to be able to get through that process and make sure that we can get a deal across the finish line when we've got a good deal in our back pocket.
I mean, that makes sense because, I know for me, when you have a buyer that, like you said, is well capitalized, they agree to the terms, but, they may not be a good fit in the minds of the OEMs. It can be very challenging.
Yep.
And, and there are plenty of those deals that do close, but, there are certainly hurdles for that, whether it be, exercising of ROFRs or
Yep.
just, delays in the approval process in general.
Yep.
But like you said, I mean, it really depends upon the specific transaction and, who the buyer is, how much, uh, how much leverage they have in general within the automotive retail space.
Yep.
I think from a consolidation standpoint, I mean, what we see is that there are certain limits that even the publics or the large
Yes.
strategic, firms can reach because of the concerns that the OEMs have.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Totally agree.
in terms of specific brands, are you seeing over the past year or so, are you seeing certain brands, that are coming to where those deals are coming to fruition more often in terms of just being desirable?
Yeah.
I mean, certainly I know lots of luxury brands are like that. We have the Toyotas and the Hondas.
Yeah.
On the flip side, there's Stellantis right now, which is having challenges, and Nissan as well. Wasn't sure if you had any comments on any of those.
No, I would say it is a little bit of the usual suspects. I mean, if we
Mhm.
had a nickel for every time someone said Toyota Lexus would be interesting for them, yeah, we could probably stop doing our jobs. But um, it's the usual
If you could
suspects.
find me a major, a Toyota store in a major metro, that's what I'm looking for. You and about 100
Yeah,
other dealers.
yeah. So there's definitely some continued interest there. BMWs, Mercedes, Honda, and then you
Sure,
start to get into certain brands like Subaru, which are going to really have a presence in certain areas, of the country disproportionately high. And at the end of the day, you mentioned Stellantis. There's a couple others that, everybody's got a different flavor of what they're looking for, but you can still run, even on some of the brands that may be out of favor, you can
sure.
still run pretty strong stores if it's in the right area, and two, if the operations are right.
Yeah,
But it is running into a little bit of a headwind on some of the brands there. But, the other piece that's interesting is, for a lot of the first time buyers and things like that, those are, sometimes the out of favor brands are the way to start to build up, your portfolio, and build into something bigger to, eventually hopefully be in the running for a Toyota or a Lexus or one of the other big brands. So there is still, an active buyer universe, for
sure.
those, like I said, what I would consider to be maybe slightly out of favor or out of favor brands. But that's a good opportunity for other people to come in and kind of put their stamp on things. And if it's a good operator, as you know, that's just a huge part of how you can be successful in this business. Um, there is a buyer universe for most assets, which is unique to auto retail, because you have these first time buyers who, in a lot of instances, will have a capital partner, um, and it's just about connecting the dots there, and that's where folks like NBB and us come in and say try and connect the dots and make some of those transactions happen.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Um, and as an advisory firm, I'm assuming you come in well before a decision is made to sell the
Yeah,
business. I mean, I know we were talking about how, the average age of most dealer operators or dealer principals is certainly growing, right?
yeah,
This is not a new topic. It's not a new subject.
yeah,
And 5, 10 years ago, we were saying, "Oh, it's going to happen. Everyone's going to retire," and a lot of those people are still here, which is
yeah,
amazing. Either they don't like golf or they just, they really love what they do, which is great.
yeah.
Um, but how are you still are you seeing more of a push in terms of just trying to name successors? I mean, it's interesting because like, every year there's a new twist, right? And with GM, effectively they've said, okay, if you're a GM dealer, if you don't have a succession plan now, we're not going to allow you to have one. And so
Mhm.
effectively you can have a successor, but they're going to have to line up and get approved,
Yeah.
after you pass in the
Yeah.
same way that a new buyer would be. Right. And
Yeah.
so how have you seen that part of the business go?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. I think one, I would say, man, golf's a fun sport. So if people want to sell their business and go play golf, we're there and happy to help. But yeah, succession planning is a big piece of it. It's an aging demographic in terms of the dealer body, and um, it's sometimes just a difficult conversation to have. Where I mean, there's only a few options from a succession planning standpoint. Of what do you do? Do you sell the company? Odds are they've been in the company for 30 plus years, and it's like a part of the family at this point, and there's a lot of not only attachment from just this is what I do for work, but just emotional attachment of this is my entire life, kind of my life's work, um, which is you know which I just love about this business. It's so cool to be able to work with people and just help them through that process. And most of our work is with privately held companies. We do have historically done less work with the public. So every one of these conversations is usually, some element of succession planning. And one, do you sell it? Two, do you have family that could potentially, be involved and take over the business? And then,
Sure.
there's, as you know, complexities there. If you have a few kids and one wants to be running the business and the others maybe want to do something else, and how are you splitting up the pie in that instance, and starting
Sure.
to think about those variables. But I think the what you mentioned is exactly right, which is we're talking to businesses 2, 3, 5, sometimes 10 years in advance of potentially selling. And the most important piece that I've found is to always try and be proactive and have a plan, and that result, 9 times out of 10, if not more, is going to be better than the reactive, uh-oh, something happened, whether it's a medical emergency or, death in the family or things like that. There's just so much amount of work that can be done on a pre-liquidity, um, tax planning basis and trust in a state that
Mhm.
you really want to have your ducks in a row, because you never know when something's going to happen. And, the big shame in it all is if something happens and you don't have control of what happens to your business. This is a lot of people's legacy, as I talked about earlier, of, this is the closest thing to them apart from their family. And, you know, do you really want to lose control or not really have a say in what happens to the business should something happen? So there's just a ton of those conversations about proactively putting in place a plan to make sure that you're getting to an outcome that's you would be happy with from a legacy planning perspective. So that's a lot about what we deal with. But yeah, we wear the therapist hat a lot, or the mediator hat, whichever you want to call it. But it's a big part of what we do, and that's the fun part, is getting to an outcome that everybody gets excited about.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but that is the fun part. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily correcting contracts necessarily. It's no,
You
but
don't love Microsoft Word and
I I
redlining things.
I love it, and I love when we have a great team on behind us who are looking at those as well as myself.
There you go.
So, but I
Right
think
answer.
the nice thing about this business, like you said, is it's the owners. It's not a huge layer of management very
Yeah.
often. So when you're dealing with someone, you're usually dealing with the head honcho. You're
Yeah.
dealing with the person who started this business, invested it in it, built it up from nothing,
Yeah.
and is now, like you said, leaving a legacy for his children, for the community, for his employees, his or her employees.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a
And
really special kind of industry to
yeah.
be in.
I totally agree. And I think, Jack Hollis, um, he's sort of coined this idea of the win-win-win outcome of how many winners can we really have, whether it's a transaction or not. But
Yeah,
can the seller be a winner? Can a buyer be a winner? Can the manufacturer be? Can the community? Um, you know, uh, get kind of giving back is a really big piece of what we do, and being able to. And by the way, the dealership community is some of the most generous and giving folks in the world, and it's just tremendous at what they do every year. And even at NADA, talking about some of the charitable causes and what we're doing, and comparing with what they're doing, and just the effect that these transactions can have on a community and their ability to give back is just, it's the coolest thing in the world. And that's, really what we want to be a part of, is those win-win-win outcomes for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I know when we spoke before, not to change topics because we could talk a long time about, the special community that this is,
Yeah,
especially after seeing so many people in NEDA. But,
yeah,
you had mentioned some of the, very often, what you'd like to do, and what you've been doing historically, obviously through Raymond James, is really to look at sellers who are managing their portfolio of dealerships, right? And so that, you look at someone from one side who may have a handful of dealerships, and like we just talked about as an example of that, maybe,
yeah,
and then you have a larger firm, maybe it's a public, maybe it's a larger private, that is looking to shed its own rooftops, and
yeah.
and we've seen a lot more of that lately in the past couple of years. And I know, looking at automotive news, there's one transaction in my neck of the woods that definitely had stood out. And how do you approach that client, that kind of seller, and what do you look to do, and how do they come to the right decision?
Yeah, it's been a very active conversation, which we're calling, portfolio optimization. The
Okay.
publics do it all the time because, again, they're public and they've got shareholders that they need to keep happy. But it's looking at, one, it could be underperformers, and then two, it could just be something that's not strategically in line with where they want the portfolio to go in the future. There's At NADA, we talked a lot about folks that wanted to really double down on the brands that they knew, that they liked, and that they really just had a great relationship with, and saw them being able to build in a more material way than trying to be, an inch, or a mile wide and an inch deep with some of the OEMs and the brands in their portfolio. So we've seen a lot of folks kind of do the inward looking evaluation and think, is this really a core asset to me? One, if they're losing money, like as I said earlier, there can still be operators that can come in and turn those profitable. But if you're a 30 rooftop group and your time and attention, if 80% of your time is spent on, two or three or four businesses that are losing money, you'd probably have more fun if you just got rid of them and focused on some of the core assets, and growing those, and finding other healthy businesses maybe in the same manufacturer that could be interesting. So we've seen privates do a little bit more of that more recently. So we did a couple transactions just in December um, that represented that, and I think it's just going to be a continued focus in 26, is um, focusing in on your specialization and the brands you really want to be a part of, and grow with them as partners. So I think it's going to be something we continue to see.
Okay, great, great. Well, Zach, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I don't know if there's anything else you want to kind of leave in terms of thoughts for some of the folks who are listening in, and particularly dealers.
No, I think just very appreciative of having me on here, Kevin. Very much appreciated, and uh, NADA was a blast. It was great to get to see everybody, and I will tell you, we're excited for a big 26 here. So thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure, and I'm looking for a great 2026 as well. It was great seeing everyone at NADA as well. So, all right, thanks again, Zach.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Take care now.